In this session, let's understand how do you deploy your first service on TrueFoundry. A TrueFoundry service is meant for continuously running applications which provide API endpoints for real-time interaction. Think about hosting real-time model inference using FastAPI or Flask. That's a use case of a service deployment. Think about dynamic website backends or even hosting model demos using Streamlit or Gradio. All of this can be deployed using the service deployment option. Now let's see how do you deploy it on TrueFoundry. Let's navigate to the platform and select from the left-hand sidebar the deployments option and then create a new deployment. Now here you can mention a natural language query and you will be guided through the deployment steps, or you can deploy manually. Let's take the second option and deploy the service manually and click on service. The first thing you need to do is select a workspace for deployment. Now, workspace is nothing but a partition of the cluster where you can deploy this particular service. If you do not have a workspace already configured, make sure to contact your administrator. Otherwise, if you have an option here to create a workspace in the control panel, you can also do that. So I'm selecting this user workspace, which is linked to this particular cluster, and the environment is prod. Now, there are multiple ways from where you can deploy your code. Remember, your Docker registry will be connected to the TrueFoundry platform by default. So whatever deployment is happening, typically it is getting pushed to the Docker registry. Now, if you already have a Docker image, that's the recommended option. You can directly deploy from your own Docker image, or you can deploy from a public Docker image if that's available. On the second option is deploying code from a GitHub repository, which is a very common option. Now you can have your own GitHub repository that you can use, or you can also deploy from a public GitHub repository. Now, one clarification that we will see shortly is you do not always need to have a Docker file within the GitHub repository, although it's a good practice to do so. In both cases, you can deploy the service. And thirdly, the option is to deploy from your local system. If you do not have Docker installed on your local system, then the TrueFoundry control plane will help you Dockerize and containerize the particular code. Now let's select code from GitHub repo and go forward. In this example, I will actually deploy this particular example, which is hosted on TrueFoundry Getting Started Examples repo. So this is my primary repository. And within this, there is a folder called Deploy Model with FastAPI. So the path that you need to mention in the GitHub repo is this particular one. All right. Before that, you need to mention the name. So I will just say deploy first service demo. And what we'll do is we'll deploy from source code. So let me select this option and mention the repo URL. So this is the repo URL, and it will automatically fetch the branch name, which is main, and the commit ID. Now the branch name you can also change to any other branch name where it will automatically fetch the latest commit ID. Let's revert back to main. Now, if you already have a Docker file in your GitHub repo, you can mention that path relative to the project root path, and you can also mention the path to build the context relative to the project root path. If you do not have a Docker file, which we do not have in this example, you can directly build using Python code as well. Now let's go back to our repository. This is a repository and this is going to be our path. So let me just copy that and mention that here. This is the path to build context. Now, because this is a FastAPI server endpoint, the command will be ubicon server, which is nothing but this server.py :app. Host is mentioned as this, and it will run on port 8000. A common issue is where the host is mentioned as localhost, which is not the right thing to do. The Python version is optional, you don't need to mention it. And Python dependencies is also a good practice to mention. Here we do have a requirements.txt, so we can just mention that. Now, one caveat here is, although you have options of UV and poetry, these will not work if you do not have a Docker file in your GitHub repository. If you want to use this option, you cannot use UV and poetry. You only need to use the Docker file option, and then you can mention UV and poetry specifications here. Docker registry is optional, so TrueFoundry will automatically fetch this. So the next thing is we need to configure the ports. Remember, for FastAPI, it's typically 8000. For Streamlit, for example, it's 8501, and for Gradio, it's 7860. You can also enable authentication where you can mention username and password, JSON web token, or even log in with TrueFoundry, which is a one-click enablement. The next section is to configure the resources where you can select the device type. By default, it's selected as CPU. You can mention the CPU requests and the limit. You can mention the memory requests and limit. And you can mention the storage request and the limit. Capacity type is prefers spot fallback to on demand, which is a popular option. Spot is almost never used, and on demand is also something that you can use if you want more control over the instance, because spot instances can be preempted in the first option and then it will fall back to on demand. Lastly, you can also set environment variables if they are required by your application code. Now, there are two things that you need to keep in mind here. The environment variable can either be a static environment variable, for example, like this, or if you have things like API keys or passwords, you do not want to mention them directly here. At TrueFoundry, we have a concept of a secret, which you can search directly with TFI, right? And you have different secrets here. Now, the common question is, how would you create these secrets? So to create these secrets, you need to navigate to the secrets tab on the left. So you need to add a secret group and you need to mention the name, the secret store, right? And also the secrets. Now let's take an example where this is already configured. For example, MCP cookbook, this is already configured with 2 secrets. So to map the environment variable to the secret, you need to just click here and you will have the FQN directly here. And what we can do is I can just mention this directly and we are good. All right. In this example, we do not need any environment variables, so I will toggle that off. Now, there are advanced fields which we will see in the next video. You can also edit this as a YAML, but we will lose our changes. You can deploy using Python, where you will see options using the TrueFoundry CLI, what you need to do. You can deploy this using YAML, where again, this will be a CLI option, or simply you can just click submit and it will start the deployment. So we have gone over a lot of configurations over how do you deploy your first service with TrueFoundry. Now what's happening is the code is getting downloaded from the GitHub repo, the Docker image is getting built, the container is getting created, and it will be deployed on a Kubernetes pod. Now this has occurred very fast because I had already deployed this earlier, so it has taken that backup and quickly deployed it. Now I want to show you one thing. You would know that with FastAPI we also have a Swagger UI. So how do we enable that? Now click on Edit. Go to advanced fields, and what you need to do is you just need to add a label here, which is TFI OpenAPI path is nothing but OpenAPI.json, and click submit. You will see the differences between the previous deployment and the updated manifest, and you will see this, and you can just confirm and deploy it. So now what you will see that the second version has started getting deployed, right? And it is reusing the existing build. It's a deploy success. Now with this, what you will see is the OpenAPI spec is available, and the benefit here is you can just try out the endpoint to see if it's working. And you will see that the response status is 200, which is it worked, took 359 milliseconds, and you will also see the prediction scores as per our example here, right? Because this is classification prediction. All right, so that's all about deploying our first service on TrueFoundry. If you have any questions, feel free to let us know directly.